Cloud Cook. High on a cloudy hill, an old lady lived in a crumbling cottage. Every morning she patrolled her windows, hoping to spy neighbours. But years passed and none came, and the views wore dim. One day her cupboards were bare. She searched her home, but found only a thimbleful of flour and an old fishing net. Clutching the net, she clambered onto the roof. Shoes clattering and legs trembling, she flung the net over a close cloud and dragged it inside. She unrolled it onto the kitchen table and watched it wobble. Then, with a pinch of the flour, she mixed it and kneaded it, divided it into bread tins and put it on a high bake. As the smell stuffed the cottage, she wandered the windows once more. No neighbours glimpsed. She sat and gobbled the cloud bread, munching till twilight. Dinner done, she trudged to bed. While she slept, the baking smell seeped over the hill, sank into the valley and squatted in the faraway village. By morning, a crowd clamoured round the village bakery. The baker unbolted the door and the crowd charged into the singed air. Rows of burnt loaves met their glare. They grabbed the bread and threw it at the baker's head. "Bread like bricks!" they cried and stormed outside. On the hill, the old lady nibbled cloud bread for breakfast and then checked her windows for neighbours. None seen, she started to search. She found an acorn cup of honey. Plotting cakes, she climbed onto the rickety roof and captured a cloud. She dripped a drop of honey on the cloud, beat it and whisked it, then slopped it into cake tins and shoved it in the oven. She sat and napped. Sweet smells swept over the hills. Hours passed. She woke and wandered to a window. She rubbed her eyes. Neighbours filled every view. She gathered up the cakes and dashed out the door. The villagers swarmed, feasting until only 5 crumbs were left. The cloud cook waited till they were gone and then ate the cake crumbs one by one. That night, the villagers chattered so long and so loud that a distant town overheard. The townspeople took their telescopes and looked at the hill. At dawn, they saddled their horses and pushed out their carriages. The mayor put his best wig on, and the town crier led them in a pie-themed song. When the cloud cook woke and wandered to her windows, she saw more neighbours than ever before. Swiftly she searched, finding a bluebell filled with cream and a walnut shell of sugar. She rattled on the roof, trapped a cloud, and took it to her mixing bowls. Then she sprinkled it with sugar, whisked it till her fork wore away, baked it in many tins, and layered it with cream till it tottered near the ceiling. She pushed, squished, and heaved the gâteau through the door. The townspeople cheered, already shouting for more. They gobbled and gorged until it was gone, fist fought for the last 2 crumbs, and clapped the cloud cook till their hands were sore. As they disappeared down the hill, the mayor shook his chains and the town crier rang his bell. The cloud cook shuffled inside and sank into sleep. That night, the townspeople made such a racket and such a row that far away beyond the forest, the Queen couldn't sleep. She opened her curtains and windows and listened. Her eyes grew wide. "Gâteau!" she sighed. By daybreak, the Queen was journeying to the forest in her carriage of gilt and gleam, surrounded by guards and servants, storytellers and seamstresses. The cloud cook woke and searched once more. She found an almond in a robin's nest, grated it with a bramble, and scrambled for a cloud. She dusted the cloud with almond gratings, folded it and flattened it, flopped it into dishes, and forced it into the oven. Then she waited at her window. When she glimpsed the neighbours, she took the tarts from the oven, fanned them cool, and dragged them outside. As the townspeople and villagers all raced for first bite, a trumpet sounded. "Her Majesty's here!" they whispered and knelt. Horses heaved the Queen's carriage up the hill. A bejewelled hand reached out and took a tart. Everyone waited in hushed silence as the Queen munched. She reached out once more, seized the Cloud Cook's hand, pulled her into the carriage and slammed the door shut. As the carriage sped from the hill, the Cloud Cook pressed her face to the window and watched the neighbours disappear. The Queen and the cook in the carriage, surrounded by guards and servants, storytellers and seamstresses, hurried back through the forest. As the day grew dark, the Queen carried a candle. When night hit, it was lit. They reached the palace in moonlight at midnight. The Cloud Cook gawped, counted windows, and guessed the number of neighbours. The Queen let her in, and she blinked. Marble and crystal, sparkle and sheen pricked her eyes. She followed the Queen through passageways and corridors to a tall tower. The Queen gave her a candle and pointed to the winding stairway. "Breakfast," she whispered. The Cloud Cook nodded and then climbed 2,000 steps to a little round room. The Cloud Cook woke at dawn. She peered out her window. Clouds floated within her grasp. She reached out, gripped one and pulled it inside. Then she dragged it down the winding stairway, through rooms and halls, corridors and passageways to the kitchen. The palace chef and his underlings rubbed their eyes. They sniggered and smirked as the Cloud Cook heaved it onto a table, sprinkled it with flour, mixed it, kneaded it, rolled it into buns and pushed them into the oven. The bell sounded for breakfast. In a scramble, the chef and his underlings seized trays and plates and marched through the door. The Cloud Cook put the buns in a bowl and followed them to the dining hall. The chef and his underlings queued round the Queen's table. She nibbled food from each plate and shook her head each time. "Sunken," she snarled at a souffle. "Bitter," she barked at biscuits. "Congealed," she croaked at a croissant. The Cloud Cook shuffled near. The Queen took a bun and a bite. "More," she moaned, and munched until the bowl was bare. From that moment on, the Cloud Cook baked for every meal. She caught clouds, pulled them down the 2,000 steps, dragged them to the kitchen, beat them or whisked them, mixed them or kneaded them, folded them or flattened them, and plunged them into the ovens. The sniggering and the smirking stopped. The chef ordered the underlings to chase clouds over the palace rooftops. Every evening the Cloud Cook carried a candle the 2,000 steps to the little round room. One morning, when the Cloud Cook woke, the ladies-in-waiting and the scullery maids, the pipers and the porters, the jesters and the courtiers were all whispering, "Banquet!" The Cloud Cook wandered to her window and peered down at the palace. Cloud catchers clambered over turrets and walls. The sky had been emptied. Clouds crammed in nets. She trudged down the winding stairway, through corridors and passageways to the kitchen. The palace chef barked, "A banquet!" pointed to a pile of clouds and clapped his hands to hurry her along. All day long the Cloud Cook whisked and stirred, mixed and kneaded, folded and rolled. Cloud cakes, bread, buns, pies, tarts, gâteaux, torts overflowed the kitchen and stuffed the halls. As the sun set, the guests knocked on the palace doors, and in marched kings and queens, knights and damsels, wise men and fortune-tellers, all clothed in velvet and jewels. The Cloud Cook crept to a corner and saw souffle scoffing and gâteau gobbling. She watched until the guests slumbered amongst the crumbs, and then carried a candle to her little round room. The Cloud Cook woke before dawn, wandered to her window, and spied cloud catchers riding out to hunt on the hills. She shuffled down the stairway, through rooms and halls, corridors and passageways, tiptoeing past sleeping guests clutching crumbs. Then she sat in the empty kitchen and awaited the hunter's return. As the sun rose, a bugle sounded. Doors bashed open and in stormed the hunters with clouds in nets, clouds on spears, clouds tied with ropes, clouds pierced with arrows, and clouds hanging from the jaws of hounds. The guests woke, clamouring for clouds, and the cloud cook whisked and stirred, mixed and kneaded, folded and rolled until dusk. Every day the hunters rode out to catch clouds. To the mountains, to the woods, to the lakes, to the shore. Refusing to go home, the guests stayed to eat more, and the palace walls shuddered with the sound of chomping and chewing, scoffing and slurping. The cloud cook folded and flattened, whisked and whipped, and as the skies grew bare, the guests grew bigger. The hunters searched farther as the clouds became fewer, until one day they returned with empty nets. There were no clouds left. The guests gathered crumbs, and when none remained, they left. Crying a single tear, the queen handed the cloud cook a candle, pointed to the path and hissed, "Go!" The palace door was unbolted and opened. Clutching the candle, the cloud cook stepped through. Behind the door, she spied a little lone cloud flying low. She reached out, grabbed it, and hid it under her hat. Then she trudged the path to the forest. Day and night she walked through the woods with the candle lighting her way. When the candle burned to nothing, she held a glowing ember to guide her path between the trees. As the ember died, she reached the hill. Spying her crumbling cottage, she shuffled up the slope and stepped inside. She took the last cloud in the kingdom out of her hat and turned it in her hands. Then she sprinkled it with flour, mixed it and kneaded it, put it in a bread tin and baked it on high. After wandering her windows, she gobbled the little loaf until it was gone.